Just a few words about PayPal. We are 18,000 people. We were founded in 1998. We floated on the stock exchange 2002, sold ourselves to eBay, and relisted on the NASDAQ last July. Last year, we had revenues of $9 billion. We operate in over 200 markets around the world. And as you heard, I've worked in different industries over the course of my career. I started in publishing. I've worked in enterprise IT. I now work in finance. Every single one of those industries, I've experienced profound disruption. I was actually a print journalist. I started as a print journalist. And it's a very sad story for print journalists who've been unable to adapt and upgrade their skills and thrive. The newspaper industry in America is all but wiped out. We've lost tens of thousands of jobs in the newspaper industry in America. I worked in enterprise IT for 7 years in IBM. And IBM itself is now being profoundly disrupted, actually by a company that started as a bookstore, by Amazon, right? So Amazon started as a bookstore, evolved into other forms of e-commerce, built a fabulous internal capability around what's now called cloud computing, and then turned that internal capability outwards and has completely transformed the value prop of how we consume computer services, how we consume applications, on what basis we do that, why we want to do that. It's an extraordinary story of digital disruption. PayPal is, as I mentioned, just 18 years old and was born on the web into the first wave of startups in the last part of the 20th century. An original disruptor, and here is our leader, Dan Schulman, at a recent conference in Europe. Here's what Dan says: "The biggest impediment to our future is our historic success. Reinvention is really important. 80% of the Fortune 100 from the 1950s do not exist anymore." PayPal at 18 years old is feeling its age. As a disruptor, it is being disrupted, actually. And it's being disrupted by many, many, many different sorts of companies who are coming at digital payments with different motivations and different business models. So we have device companies like Apple and Samsung. We have social networking companies like Facebook and messenger applications. We have traditional players like banks, some of whom are really getting their act together. We have new waves of startups, particularly on the merchant side, like Stripe and Square. It's a roiling ocean of disruption in which the product is changing rapidly, the customer expectation about the payments experience is changing rapidly, the competitive dynamics of the marketplace are changing rapidly, and Dan's question to us as a company and to the industry is, how do we compete? How do we continue to stay relevant? It's also, I think, perhaps above all, when I think of my kids especially, and my colleagues, it's a personal imperative, right? Software, data, and now rising machine intelligence is changing the nature of careers, of professions, of the skills that we need to remain relevant in the marketplace, of the value we bring and create at work. And it's a personal imperative that we need to find the capability within ourselves to be able to adjust and adapt to this constant transformation that's happening. So, As managers and as leaders, especially in creative professions like marketing and product development, product management, we are very focused on trying to create learning processes inside our companies. I'm often asked, actually, what should we be learning at school? I have neighbors and friends who come up to me and says, what should my kid be learning? A couple of years ago in Connecticut, where I used to live, it was like, should we be learning Mandarin? The Chinese seem to be really taking over the world. Should we be learning Mandarin? Should my kid be learning how to code? Right? Should we be encouraging our kids to learn environmental science? And, I think about my oldest daughter. My oldest daughter's 18. She starts at University of Connecticut later this month. Her retirement age, if she does retire, she'll retire in 2060. So what is the jobs market going to look like in 2060? For that matter, what is the jobs market going to look like in 2030 when she's 32? I've got absolutely no idea. I couldn't venture an opinion about what skills my daughter should be learning right now. I couldn't tell you. And I think that really is the point, is that what we need to be able to teach our children and to be able to inspire our children with is the capacity to learn. A curiosity inside of them that helps them learn whatever skills are needed in the future, whatever skills are going to be relevant, so that they remain relevant. That's actually what I need at work too. That's how I cast my teams. I'm looking less for domain expertise and more for a curiosity and a desire to learn. Right? What my team does, we're a product group. We build software, we build user experience libraries, we build frameworks, we build methods, we integrate IT, we engage the marketing teams, the customer service teams in building better customer experience. What sort of skills do we need to do that? Well, we use React JavaScript libraries. We use API-driven content management systems. We use the Google stack. We use Google Analytics, right? We use rapid prototyping and user testing. We've built an atomic design system. Is it really important that we hire those skills? Well, maybe. But is it more important that we hire people who are willing to learn those skills and become expert at them, and frankly, anything else that the future may hold? I think that's more important. This is actually what my team wrote down as their learning process. And it's not actually very difficult to come up with this. And if you were to sit down with a product development team or a marketing team and ask them, how do we build a process or design a process of learning? I'm sure they would write down something like this, right? So we start with customer discovery, right? We're trying to understand customer need. We're trying to interpret that need into some sort of product or experience we're going to go build. We want to prototype that product or experience with the customer. We want to get feedback from that. We want to collect the data. We're going to analyze it, and then we go again. It's actually fairly easy to describe, but I've found over the years it's really, really difficult to do in practice. And it's especially difficult to do in practice in short, agile cycles of iteration. There's something pretty difficult about this culturally, I think. And that's what I've been investigating. So the good news is that actually we're all born learners. I have 3 kids. I watched my kids grow up. They taught themselves how to walk, how to talk, had to interact with each other. They taught themselves how to express their creativity with, it seemed like, no help from me or my wife. They were born with the capacity to learn, and it's an innate property of our species, and we've evolved it over 1 million years. Actually, it's what distinguishes us as a species from other species, is our ability to learn and our ability to transmit our culture from generation to generation. So we're born with it. If you doubt me, I would go and take a look at this experiment. This started in January 1999, and it was called The Hole in the Wall. And it was a guy called Sugata Mitra. He's a science director at an Indian technology company. And his building, his office building, faced one of the poorest slums in New Delhi. And he decided to do an experiment one day. And what he did was he installed a computer in the wall of the building facing the slum. And he observed what happened. And what happened was that these slum kids basically taught themselves how to operate the Windows operating system and the packaged software that came with it. With no adult intervention, no adult supervision, they just taught themselves how to do it. They actually evolved an entire language to help themselves understand what it was and the metaphors of the UI and everything else. He later connected it to the internet, and the kids started to teach themselves how to read. And then they started downloading articles that were interesting to them. And they taught themselves science and English. Again, all with no adult supervision, no adult intervention. This sort of really helped me understand the true nature of education, which is that we're all self-educated, frankly. We have a sort of concept that we go to school to be educated. We sit, much like in classrooms like this, and some guy at the front drones on, and we get educated. But that's not true. We educate ourselves. And we educate ourselves really very, very well. So we've been doing some experiments in PayPal, and this sort of grew out of, we started doing these things where we're asking the kids to come in and learn how to do code. And you can see here, you know, the competition for programmers in Silicon Valley. We're getting younger and younger these days. But then we thought, well, okay, so there's code, but then there's also design and customer experience. And the world of applications and software is certainly migrating to those things where we need to understand the customer better, we need to differentiate the experience better, et cetera, et cetera. So we started running design thinking classes. And you guys know that design thinking, it's sort of a loose collection of methods for essentially interacting directly with the customer, understanding their needs, prototyping solutions, interviewing them, and iterating, right? And, you know, when I do this with adults, we have all sorts of things we have to do to go through for the adults to get comfortable with the whole thing, right? So we have to explain what we're going to go do, and we have to reassure them, and we have to give them instructions, and we have to offer encouragement. And the kids, you don't need any of this, right? You don't need any of it. They're naturals. They take to it with no instruction at all. They know intuitively what you're asking them to do, right? So here's a kid. The exercise was, so how do we make the photography experience better between the person taking the photograph and the subject, right? And this kid here has made some fancy glasses where he's going to take a picture of the subject of the glasses because it's less obtrusive, right? It upsets you less. It's more natural. And then he's got a gauntlet on his hand here where he's going to be projecting the photos into the air, you know, holographically or something, right? So that they can discuss them as it goes along. So this one, a little bit more out there, I think, probably, involves this sort of giant pet pirate llama, getting on a plane to Timbuktu. What is it about kids that makes them so creative, right? What is it that they bring to these situations, to these engagements that we sometimes leave behind? It's like they're just really super willing to put it out there, right? I mean, what do they know about photography? And yet they're just willing to give it a go, give it a risk, put it out there, put something out there. Let's just see what happens. They're just making it up. Why? Why is it that they can do that and we struggle? Well, I've come across this branch of psychology which really explains learning through play. That actually the reason kids are so good at learning is because we learn through play, and kids are great experts at how to play. It's how they learn. And that's what they're doing in the class. They're playing. It's interesting to me when I think about play, we think of play actually as the opposite of work, which is kind of upsetting to me, right? We think of schoolwork and homework, and then play is something that happens in recess, which, by the way, is getting shorter and shorter. Or play is something that happens after school, which, by the way, is also getting constrained as we schedule our kids in activities like music or sport. Play is actually how we learn. And I'm going to give you what I've learned about play as I've made some research on this talk. And I'm going to put it in the context of work. So here are the features of play. Feature number one of play is voluntary. And you might ask yourself, well, what relevance does that have to work, right? Well, let's think about the education system. The education system is actually not voluntary. The education system is compulsory in most countries. You're legally required to go to school and stay there. It's actually a prison. We incarcerate our children in school, and we expect them to learn under those circumstances. And as I've seen my kids go through school, I see them fight that. They don't want to be in school. They want to be playing. They want to be out there playing. And instead, they're stuck in school. I actually ran away from school. I went to 11 different schools. I couldn't stand it. I taught myself. Play is voluntary. And by the way, so is work. Work is voluntary. Work is a voluntary contract between you and me. We agree, you're going to work for this company, I'm going to pay you. It's a voluntary contract. And quite often I find myself having to explain that to people. It's voluntary, you know? You don't have to come. You could go do something else. I actually think this point about voluntariness underlies the growing rise of purpose-driven companies. We heard Daniel earlier talking about his wonderful venture and his entrepreneurialism, and you heard him talk about his fear, right? And just what it takes to buck the system and want to go do that. You have to want to go do that. You have to be inspired by the mission and the purpose, right? That's a prerequisite to creativity. It's a prerequisite to innovation. So the ADMA asked me to write a sentence about brightest minds, which I found a bit intimidating. But here's what I wrote about PayPal. PayPal is a fast-growing, two-sided network that connects 188 million active consumers and business accounts all over the world, helping sustain and grow friendships, families, and business relationships everywhere. It's thrilling for me to have the opportunity to get up every morning and work on better enabling those dreams and ambitions. And it really is thrilling for me to do that. It's a massive network, and we have such wonderful stories of entrepreneurs. Our sweet spot on the merchant side is the sole proprietor, that person with a dream, right, who wants to run their business, who wants to set up their business, they're passionate about their business, and PayPal enables that to happen. And that's what motivates me to come into work every day, to volunteer my time and my energies in service of that. Play is an expression of openness. So when we play, we have open minds, right? We're open to possibilities. We're open to new ideas. We're open to the opinions of our colleagues. And yet, in our workplaces and in our education systems, we do many, many things that psychologically actually close the brain down. So I'll give you one example. It's been proven in scientific laboratory tests that if I tell you I'm going to measure you, right, you're going to be less creative, either as an individual or as a team, than if I tell you you're doing it for the sake of it, right? So there was one test where a group of people were asked to paint a painting. One group was just told, just go paint, express yourselves. The other group was told there's going to be a bunch of judges, and they're going to judge you for your creativity, and you're going to be judged against this group. And every time they ran the test, the evaluation was the first group was more creative than the second. And you think about that, and then you think about our education systems, where we are obsessed with standardized testing. My kids have all had terrible anxiety about it. We're obsessed with it. We're obsessed with the scores, right? And now think about our workplaces. How many performance reviews have you had, and how does that make you feel? Does that make you feel open to playful creativity, right? You're going to be judged against your peers, right, for your work. So Google actually has been doing a lot of work. Google's very, very science-oriented, very data-oriented, and they're a big company now. They've got 70,000 people, so they have a lot of data to work on. And they've been doing some studies of their teams internally and which teams perform best. And they worked on this research for a long time, and they couldn't find any differentiators in the data. They couldn't find anything that could consistently predict which team performed better and which didn't. One of the researchers came across this theory called psychological safety. And psychological safety is really a state of mind where I'm sitting there with a group of people, right? And I feel safe to put myself out there and give my opinion or give my idea, right? No matter how crazy it is. That's psychological safety. They went back and tested for that, and they found very strong correlation between team performance and the presence or absence of psychological safety on the team. It's that sense of, I feel like I can speak up. So, we talked about HR systems and we talked about education systems, and those things are going to be extremely difficult to change. Nevertheless, there are things we can do, every one of you guys can do every day to improve your openness to creativity and play. And we're going to do it right now. So, I was warned yesterday by a couple of colleagues that this might not go down very well in Australia. But I actually have no doubt that you guys are full of playful creativity. So we're going to run this anyway. So I want you all to stand up. Okay, so this is inspiration here. This is visual inspiration here. This is JT. He's a UX lead on the PayPal.com team. And I want you all to just pair off into partners. Okay, just find a partner. Very good. Now, hang on a minute before we go. So, here are the instructions. So, what you're going to do is you're going to tell each other, in whatever way you like, you are awesome. And you're going to take it in turns saying you are awesome to each other until it no longer feels uncomfortable. Okay, let's go. All right. That's not bad. Okay. I've actually run this a couple of times. It's quite difficult to stop. All right, come on. Okay, that was awesome. Very good. I did this at Microsoft. They were a little bit louder than you. But all right, so let's all sit down. Now, what we've done here is we have primed you for creativity, because that's actually a very simple bit of improv, and I use improv a lot at the start of creative workshops and things, because improv actually, and Google explained it to me. I didn't have any clue why I was doing this. It just worked. But improv actually helps with this sense of psychological safety, right? We've just made ourselves vulnerable to each other. We feel safer. We're gonna express an opinion. So you guys are now ready for extraordinary acts of creativity. Unfortunately, you're all sitting down in this amphitheater facing me, and you've got to listen to me for another 20 minutes. So, play is actually self-structured. This is a really difficult concept for managers, I've found over the years. Play is self-structured. When you watch kids play, actually the start of the play, they're basically negotiating with each other on the rules of the play, right? So sisters playing with dolls and dolls' houses, and one pretends to be a princess, and the other one says, no, you can't be a princess, I want to be the princess, and so on, right? Or kids playing in the street, or playing a game in the street. Think about the difference between, I don't know, I guess you guys have Little League soccer, right, versus playing a casual game in the street. The game in the street is something that the kids make up the rules, right? The soccer game that we drive them to, they're having to play the rules that are given to them, right? And this is a really important aspect of play, that it's self-structured, right? And it actually pairs really interestingly, I think, with this nature of voluntariness, right? Because self-structured rules are basically arbitrary rules, right? So unless I actually want to play the game, the rules aren't going to make any sense to me. So a lot of people in America play golf. Golf makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. Absolutely none. What is the point of getting a little white ball with a metal stick and knocking it down the golf course? Why wouldn't you just pick up the ball, walk down the course, put it in the hole, and then go do something differently? Why wouldn't you do that? I'm basically saying I'm not volunteering for this game, and therefore the rules don't make any sense. And I have these conversations with people at work sometimes. It's like, well, the rules are arbitrary, but you've got to want to play. You've got to want to do it, right? Play, this is a quote actually that I thought was so powerful. I had it baked into the wall at one of the labs we built in New York. Creating the conditions where a team can effectively manage itself is a powerful act of leadership, right? So when I think of management, when I think of leadership, I think of trying to create environments in which the teams themselves can decide how they're going to work, right? They have to come together and decide for themselves, what they want to do, how they want to work, what are their daily rituals and artifacts of their work. These are agreements the teams have to make. And when they look to me to make those things, I push it back down to them and say, no, that's for you to do, right? It's an important aspect of creativity, that your teams really need to agree with each other how they structure their work. Play gives participants control of their time, of their space, of their workspace. This is another really important feature. Control of your time. How many of you feel like you have control of your time at work? One. Two, good job. It's actually, I find it as a manager a really difficult thing to do, is to give people their time. And the way you give people their time is you dedicate them into, scope, into a project, into a mission. It's actually a really hard thing to do, especially in a matrixed organization. But without the time, how am I going to commit myself in a way I need you to commit yourself to the work? Workspace is actually a really important topic. And I've been surprised over the years just how powerful workspace can be, the physical environment of where we work in creating or destroying culture. So my simple rules of workspace are whiteboards that are movable for separating the teams, and tables that are movable so the teams can build their own space. Those are my rules. Actually, I found through a lab we built in Manhattan in New York that DIY is actually best of all. This happened through a mistake. So we were opening this lab, and we were co-locating a whole bunch of teams that had been spread around the country, actually around the world, and we were bringing them into this studio in New York. And we were building the studio at the same time, and unfortunately the people arrived before the furniture did. And the team rallied and went down to Home Depot and got a bunch of stuff and built the tables themselves. And it really set the tone for the place, this sort of bootstrapping by the teams of the environment itself into existence. And every time I went down there, it was different, right? The lab had changed. There was made out of simple, cheap materials, plywood, foam board, right? Every time I went down there, something had changed about it. They'd changed the space. They'd adapted the space, and it sort of just like the quote said, it was just a very tangible way for me to give permission to the teams to be creative. To put it out there, right? To risk something. It was a very powerful thing. Actually, the later lab we built, which was downtown in Astor Place, we spent a lot more money on, and then we brought in the corporate designers, and it wasn't nearly so effective. So DIY. This one I wanted to show you guys because this actually we did in Sydney with the marketing team here in Sydney. And what we did was, people had come into these labs in the US. We had one in Tokyo, we had one in London, and they loved the culture, they loved the energy, and they were asking, what can we do to bring this to us? How do we get some of this here in Australia? So what we did was we basically shipped them 8 pieces of foam board and a flat panel TV and a set of instructions. And they made their own lab out of foam board and plastic ties. And the team that occupied this lab, we gave them some coaching on methods and goals and KPIs and how to work together and everything. The team that occupied this lab, the story is that it was one of the poorest performing teams in marketing and communications. They were doing pretty low-level production work. The business was grinding them into the ground, et cetera, et cetera. And I caught up with them a year later, and there'd been total transformation. They were the best performing team on the floor. Everyone wanted to know what was happening inside these foam boards. Very, very simple, very inexpensive, and very transformative, right? Just giving people a sense of you can make your own space, you're in control of your own space, and so on. So just as an aside, actually the cubicle itself, Robert Probst invented the cubicle back in the 1960s working for Herman Miller, and this is what he designed, and it looks actually pretty good, right? I mean, I'd quite like to work there, right? It looks not too shabby, but this is actually what the cubicle turned into. I think it speaks to the power of prevailing corporate culture, that this poor guy's idea, which was all about flexibility and creativity and ergonomics and health, got turned into this, right? And he was later quoted as saying, the cubicalizing of modern corporations is monolithic insanity. Sticky notes. Why is it that I'm compelled to talk about sticky notes when I give talks about learning and creative culture? Sticky notes to me They were like magic for a while. We used to run this method called story mapping. It comes from lean startup techniques. And basically what you do is you collapse requirements gathering, which can happen over the course of weeks or months, into a day. And you bring in people who can represent the business, people who can represent design, people who can represent technology, and they build a UX backbone for an experience, and then they build the technology requirements for that UX backbone, and then they prioritize the releases of those backbones, and they do all of that in one day. And it felt like magic to me. And it was like chaos. You know, you could have 30, 40 people collaborating together, and out of chaos synthesizes something, and it felt like magic until someone pointed me to this website called drawtoast.com. And drawtoast.com is a website created by a guy called Tom Wujek. Tom is a design fellow at Autodesk, and Tom did some studies of people drawing toast. So the exercise was, how do you draw toast? How do you make toast? We'd like you to draw it, right? And so with the first group of people, he gives them a piece of paper and a felt pen. He says, draw toast. And then he analyzes the complexity and fidelity of the visualizations of the mental models these people have created in drawing toast. And on average, humans with a piece of paper and a felt pen are able to draw systems of sort of 4 to 6 steps, right? So with the second group, he gives them sticky notes, and he says the same thing. And they come back, and with sticky notes, you're able, as a human, to conceptualize a system of, on average, 8 to 12 steps. So quite an improvement. He then, for the third exercise, runs the same thing, but asks teams to collaborate with sticky notes, right? And he says, go draw toast. And they come back with extraordinarily detailed and visualized systems of drawing toast, 18 to 22 steps on average, right? So actually, if you think about it, you think about sticky notes versus PowerPoint, for instance, you know, which is still, even in 2016, has us in the grips of its pointlessness and its lack of power. PowerPoint, I'm sitting here and I'm presenting you a PowerPoint. What can you do with it? You know, can you pick it up? Can you rearrange it? No, it's fixed. It's not an invitation to play. It's not an invitation to rearrange. It's not an invitation to improve. It's a one-way download of information. Sticky notes, you can scribble on them, right? You can scrunch them up, throw them away. You can start again. Actually, the teams, you know, what typically happens, the board goes crazy with ideas, and then the people who are good at organizing things emerge and start organizing them into themes, and then they get reorganized, and then people will take them off the wall and write other things on the wall, and some extraordinary, complex, beautiful things emerge out of it. Sticky notes you can actually use for many, many different applications inside companies. They're great for building designs of customer experience. They're great for designing complex systems in general. They're great for visualizing the competitive landscape. They're also great for teams synthesizing on forming goals. Actually, kind of more profound than the complexity and fidelity of the systems we produce with sticky notes is what it does in synthesizing people around a common understanding of the problem or the solution they're going after, right? Would that we had more of that inside our companies. So, play is its own reward. This is an important point too. We play for the sake of playing. And again, you know, when we emphasize or overemphasize the reward, the extrinsic reward of work, right? The money or the promotion, right? It's been proven to depress creativity. You know, I think about this, I reflect on this, and I think about the amount of time I've spent in large companies and small companies for that matter, talking about revenue and profit and cadence and sales and all these things, versus the amount of time I spend discussing how the work gets done. Because that's what play is, essentially. It's how the work gets done. And it's its own reward, so we just keep playing. We play the game again and again. It's why play is repetitive. It's why we do it again and again. We want to get better at it. How much time do we spend inside companies, inside our organizations, thinking about and improving how the work gets done, how we engage people in play? Scientific method actually is exploratory play. Science is a form of adult sanctioned play. And we've started in PayPal.com actually formally following the scientific method. So we have the teams writing down their hypotheses about the customers. And then we construct experiments and we test them and we measure them. And it invites a sort of openness and a creativity to the exercise that we didn't have before. Prototyping is a form of constructive play. This is Charles and Ray Eames, and they're prototyping an experience, right? They're prototyping actually an event. And it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Charles Eames. He says, "The solution is the model of the problem," right? So what's he doing here? He's modeling the problem in paper, and by modeling the problem in paper, he's understanding more deeply what the solution is. Agile Scrum is actually a game itself. So those of you familiar with Agile Scrum, it's a software development technique, it's a product development technique, and it's a game of productivity where we as a team play the game again and again and again to see how much more productive we can become. It's a very, very interesting technique. So play is a shared activity, actually. If you think back to the kids and the hole in the wall, the kids are essentially learning together. And when you observe kids playing, you see them helping each other out. Actually, mixed age groups learn faster than groups of kids of the same age. The older kids help the younger kids to learn. They adjust their styles of play to help the younger kids learn. And in doing that, in teaching, actually the older kids learn themselves. They learn deeper about the subjects they're teaching because they have to explain them, right? And in thinking about it and explaining it, they learn about it. So for me, the core metaphor for how work needs to get done is the shared table. Around my shared table, I have product management, I have design, I have content, I have engineering, I have analytics. And my teams learn together. They do everything together. They prototype together. They learn about the customer together. They interview the customer together. They fail together. They pick each other up, right? They help each other along. They provide scaffolds for learning for each other, right? When they need to adopt new things. They learn faster together. In this way, actually, learning and innovation scales in because sharing is the key mechanism by which we scale learning. It's why we have an impulse to build labs and studios. I've built a few in my time. Here's a very simple ritual that the teams go through. It's called a feature presentation. They present the work that they do to anyone in the company who wants to listen every 2 weeks. They work for 2 weeks, and then they present the work. And you see here, on the inside of this photo, you have the team presenting the work. And on the outside of the photo, you have other people in that studio learning from it. This, to me, explains the trend towards vertical campuses, right? So GE has just relocated its offices from suburban Connecticut into downtown Boston. Motorola has gone into downtown Chicago. At IBM, we nearly put our headquarters, if it wasn't for certain tax complications, into Manhattan. Vertical campuses increase the density of learning teams and increase the speed of learning. So I'm going to finish. I started with digital disruption. Actually, the real theme of my talk has got really nothing to do with digital disruption. It's growthfulness. And growthfulness and being growthful, if you look up that word, it's the capacity to grow. So do you have the capacity to grow? Does your team have the capacity to grow, right? I think growthfulness is a prerequisite to sustainable growth. growth that isn't forced, right? Growth that isn't created through extending our hours or increasing a pressure on people, right? Or increasing the bonuses we give people. Sustainable growth is something that happens organically, and it starts with the individual, and it starts with their capacity to grow. And I think there's nothing more important in this world. Thank you very much.